Hi, I'm Keith, and we're gonna paint a farm. So I'm going to begin describing my materials first. I'm using 140 cold press watercolor paper. It's one of the best products, and I think it's good for professionals and amateurs because it can take a lot of abuse. So the other thing I'm working with Schminky paints, and they're pan paint, and they're very good quality, but any watercolors will work for you. I tend to work in a butcher pan. You can buy the plastic trays, but I feel that the butcher trays are better because the water doesn't bead up, and it makes it easier to mix and to see what exactly is going on your paper, which I will hopefully demonstrate. So I'm going to begin. I'm going to start with the sky. And with watercolors, what you do is you wet the area that you want to paint. So I don't have to wet the entire image. I'm just going to wet this area that's the sky. I'm going to bring it down to the horizon line, and then I'm going to add my color. I'm going to create some clouds. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it. I'm using I'm going to use a ultramarine blue. The reason is it's a colder sky, and I kind of want to make this more of a cooler fall image. So I am taking my paint, I bring it out in my tray, okay? That way I can blend it, I can see exactly what color I'm going to be applying to the watercolor itself. So I like to get my paint ready first before I wet it, so that I can go ahead, I'll wet the paper, and then I don't have to worry about it drying on me. I got a little paint in there. So I want to get it going. Now, watercolors, hey, the paint doesn't go where there's no water, unless I apply it directly with the brush. So I'm just going to wet this up. Might be hard to see on camera. Technical guy, can you see the water?
We can see it.
Okay, good. All right. So I like...
How wet do you get it?
It's got to be fairly wet because we're going to be applying a lot of paint, and we want it to move nicely. There is a couple dry areas. This is going to kind of represent where the clouds are going to go too. So let me just get it on here, and let me get started. And I kind of like doing skies with a little swoop to them, so it's kind of coming up over you. But there's a there is a sky for every painting and every occasion, and half of the fun I have doing landscapes is doing the sky. It is a major part of what makes the picture work. So as you can see, I'm applying the paint, but I'm not applying it everywhere because I want some of it to be clouds. So we're going to leave them white. The horizon is usually, I'm going to lift my paper. What I'm doing is I'm kind of moving the paint around a little bit to achieve different textures. So it's a little lighter in some areas, a little darker in others. One thing about watercolors is that the paint dries. It looks great wet, but the paint dries 40% lighter than when you apply it. So you have to keep in mind that you may have to apply maybe a little darker than you would expect, okay? And you get used to it. As you use your paints, you'll become aware of what will happen with your paint. You'll know how dark, how light they get. So I kind of like this. It's kind of those crisp, cool clouds that sweep up in the fall. So I'm going to let this go here, and I have to let this dry. So I'm going to take a break and we'll let it set, and then we'll come back and go again. Hey, the paint's dry now, and we're going to go ahead and continue on. I did want to mention, hey, what's with the blue tape? And what I like to do is I like to put a little bit of a border around my painting so that the framer has something to grab onto when they're putting it in a frame. So gives them, and I also found that the paper doesn't buckle quite as much if you don't go right to the edge. So these are just a couple things. If you're not going to put it on a board and staple it all down, these are just, the blue tape is a very helpful little item. I'm going to start working on, the building now. This is a little more detail. I've got 3 outbuildings in this farm scene. I'm going to make them old. They're going to be kind of grayish brown, no paint. They're going to be rusty roofs, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to use a little bit of indigo, and a little bit of burnt sienna. And I'm going to kind of almost blend them together. It's not like one color, it's almost like 2 colors. I grab up the paint. Oops, I forgot one thing. I'm gonna wet the surfaces first. So I'm gonna do one side first, so you can get an idea of what I'm doing. Might be hard to see my my drawing in this because I like to keep the pencil lines very light. But as I do it, I think you'll be able to see what I'm up to. All right, so I'm lightly wetting the surface, the first surface I'm going to work on. I'm going to grab my paint, and I'm just going to run the color down more or less in the direction of the boards. At this point, it's pretty wet, and you don't really have to worry too much. Later on, as I add more and more color to this, it does start becoming important how the paint is applied. So, got me a little gray front going here.
Why did we wait for the sky to dry before you started on the building? Because it's not...
Well, they're not really touching, you're right. The reason is I don't like getting my hands in my paint, and if you get in a hurry, that's what ends up happening. I'm sitting here, I don't want little handprints in my painting. So that is one of the reasons. But a lot of times things kind of touch, and you don't want maybe one thing bleeding into another. The other thing about letting it dry completely is that's what sets the color on the page. Now, I could scrub real hard and maybe bring some of this up, but I think what's important is that you understand that watercolors you can build in layers. So, how do I keep one layer from blending into another layer? Is you let the paint dry. That sets it. Then you can go on, you can add another layer. You can add another layer. As long as you let it dry, you can apply many layers of color. And we'll get into that a little bit. Not in the sky, in the buildings here. We will be doing that, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now this little building over here, which I maybe can see, I don't know. It's so small, I'm not even going to wet it. I'm just gonna paint it, okay? There's a point where, you don't have to wet everything. As long as you got enough water in your paint, you should be fine. So as you can see, I just did this little side of this building. I am letting, I'm going to let these dry because I want to put more colors on, okay? And if I take color now and it's still damp, what happens is if I put the if I put here, let's see if we can do it. If I put it in while it's drying or not quite dry, you can get bleeds. I'm actually in a pretty good shape here as far as bleeding. So what happens is the water that you're applying to the next layer or to the last layer pushes the paint aside. We might do that in a little side venue here. I can show that to you later. But I'm going to go ahead and just keep painting. So I'm going to add a little more indigo, a little more burnt sienna. These two colors I use in varying. It's great for nature. It's great for cement. Those two colors I can vary them by the amount of color applied. It's amazing the range of color I can get from just those two colors. One more little gray building over here. So, and I don't know if anybody can see, I've got a couple fence posts in front of these buildings. So that's what I'm kind of working around. It's kind of fun. They don't all have to be the exact same color, that kind of thing. Now, if you got a little too much paint, or you want to lift a little of the color, what you do is you rinse your brush. You can then wipe it on a paper towel, get your brush a little bit dry. And this is called lifting. And I can lift some of the paint back up if I don't need it. This works great for if you're doing highlights or something on perhaps a shiny surface like an apple or a piece of fruit. It's a technique that you use often in watercolors. So the idea is to clean your brush off and just pull the paint back up again. I'm going to bring that down a little more. All right, cool. All right, so these guys are drying fairly quickly. Could be the lights. Some people ask, "Oh, why don't you use a hairdryer to, get things moving a little faster?" The problem with hair dryers is it actually affects the color of the of your watercolors. It dulls them. So I do not recommend using a hair dryer ever, ever, ever. Let it dry. Take the time. Waste the time. You get a much better product out of it. That being said, you just have to wait it out. On them humid days. So I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna do one of the sides here. I'm gonna do it a little bit darker. I'm trying to get a little bit of shadow going on the sides of the buildings. So whatever I do to one, usually I have to kind of do to all the rest of them. So I got a couple little windows in there. And we got a little one here. Okay. So, alrighty. So now, while those are drying, I'm going to start bringing the boards out, kind of individualizing them. As you can see, I did not wet the paper this time. I'm using a dry brush technique. What that is I'm just applying the paint directly onto the paper without wetting the surface. Okay, so I can throw down a few lines here so kind of look like boards, old barn wood. But watch this. I'm going to take a little bit of water in my brush, just damp, okay, and I'm going to kind of bleed them a little bit. So just kind of soften those edges, okay? So it's not such a hard line anymore. So I'm going to do that again. A little bit bigger over here. I'll drag a few lines down. These are going to kind of represents the old barnwood. And they don't all have to be real thin. Sometimes it can be blocks of color too. But now before that dries up though, I'm going to kind of come in. I'm just going to soften it a little bit by adding just, you know, dampening the surface a little bit. So I start dry brush, but then I drag a little bit of moisture in just to kind of soften it up a little bit. Eventually I will get to very fine, hard, dry lines. But we're building up, you know, color. We're building up in layers. I want the boards to be a little lighter, a little darker. It kind of gives it that feeling of old barnwood. Can't think of the... God, I'm terrible. Let me try this again. I'm trying to give it the feeling of the grain, the old grain, the separation of the boards. Just something that hasn't been painted and has been sitting around for a long time in the sun. So...
And an organic look. You don't want something that's so refined. It's not an architectural drawing.
That's right. It's a pretty rustic feeling. I love doing old buildings. This is half the fun of watercolors for me, is achieving this agedness in my paintings. And I've lived in some great places where they have, you know, just lots of farmland. Hawaii, where they have the old coffee farms and mills and stuff, and it's just a very fun technique. All right, so I'm letting it dry. You can see there's a few little light areas. I've got them here and there. I've varied the color of the grays a little bit. I'm going to go in now and I'm going to start varying the color more towards the browns now. So I'm going to take the burnt sienna, and instead of the Payne's gray, or I'm sorry, the indigo being the more dominant color, now I'm going to use the browns. So I'm going to, let's try it out here. A little bit more. A lot of bit more. Okay. So again, the boards have not quite dried, as you can see. These areas that I painted earlier. The reason I'm doing that is I want the brown to kind of bleed out a little bit. So it is still just a bit moist. If you're not comfortable doing this, you can let the area dry completely and just re-wet it. If you feel like you're not getting it done in time, just let it dry and then go ahead, re-wet it, and then start applying this brown surface here, okay? Now, barns, the old buildings, they had eaves, they had you know, a little overhang. The roof overhang the building a little bit. So I'm going to put a little bit of shadow up under what's going to be the roof line there. I'm going to add a little more the indigo up here. All right. Just to get a little more shadow going. Cool. Now, if you ever look at old buildings, old barns and stuff, you'll notice that usually the upper areas up near the roof are got a little more color to them, and the bottoms are more washed out. Reason for that is the rain hits these buildings, hits the ground, kind of bounces up, and it kind of the rain kind of fades away the wood even more. So towards the bottom, you want your buildings to be a little on the lighter side. All right. I'm going to add just a little more brown. I'm going to let that one set up. Okay, I'm going to let it dry. One of the last steps I do will be the very fine lines. But for right now, I'm just getting color in. Just trying to make it little, the variation in color. Just makes it a little more interesting. All right, so I'm going to come over to this side, over to the front of this building. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to start adding the color. It's dry at first. Dry brush at first. I'm just going to drag some of this burnt sienna, a little more of the burnt sienna and gray. All right, so see how I leave towards the bottom. See how it's a little bit lighter. Just gives it that old washed out feeling at the bottom. Okay, and then I'm going to rinse my brush, tap it with the paper towel, just to kind of, I don't want, well, hang on, just a little bit. I want moisture, but I don't want too much. I don't want to hit it with a lot of water. So that's all I'm doing is softening it up a little bit. Okay. And let me go ahead. I'm going to add just a little bit of shadow under this eaves. I'll create one anyway. There we go. This is going to be a tree up in here that's kind of overhanging the building here. So maybe even drop a little bit of shadow there. All right. So at this point, what I'm going to do is, rather than stop, I'm going to go ahead, since this is dry up here, this is wet down here, but I can put a little separation in so that my roof, I can paint my roof. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now, I want old tin roof. So again, lots of burnt sienna, little bit of the indigo, not so much, or even I could use a little bit of the ultramarine blue and mix that with the burnt sienna, and I'm gonna create me an old rusty kind of tin roof. So I'm going to leave a little bit of an edge so I don't hit my barnwood. So that'll be my what do you call that, soffit around the building. So this one's a little farther back. The angle's pretty sharp, okay? So the color can be, you know, fairly deep and rich. So I'm going to take a little bit of water. If I drop it in here, what I'm trying to do is I want to lift a little of that color out while it's still wet. If you add water, you can you know, get it wet and then use your brush to lift and pull some of the color out. I'm doing that because I want to put some ridges in there eventually. I'm going to go to this building now. And this is, like I said, this is old derelict buildings, okay? So the roof is bowed, bent. Just makes for a little more interesting look. All right. That looks pretty good. This one, a little bit lighter than this one. And I'm going to lift some of that color out because I'm going to add a lot of detail there. And I'm going to do one more real quick. that looks okay. So again, I have to wait. So we're going to take a break here, okay? I need to be able to let this dry, and we'll come back in and we'll finish up the buildings. Hey, we're back. I'm about to do a little more of the detail on the buildings now. I'm going to first add a little bit of roof to other side of the building that I missed before we let it dry up. So, ta-da, that was easy. At this point now, excuse me, I'm going to use the dry brush technique. That's where we use the, you know, we put the paint in the brush, but we don't wet the paper. And I'm going to draw some more of the finer lines now. This will get us more or less the individual boards in the building, okay? Now, the nice thing is you don't have to have perfectly straight lines. In fact, I mean, they should be straight up and down, let's put it that way. But they should, if they're, you know, kind of rough, or it just kind of makes it look more old, more textured. So that's what I'm doing. So they don't have to be perfect, and honestly, they don't have to be, you know, exactly the same size. You know, I think they look, the buildings look better if there's a little bit of a, you know, imperfection to them. Okay, so as you can see, I've got some of these lines in. You can see some are fat, thin. That's just the space between these buildings as they age and get older. I'm just gonna soften it with a little bit of water again, just to kind of knock the hard edge down. But at this point, you can see they definitely look like, you know, old barnwood. Now, I'm gonna run the boards in these old barns. You know, at a certain point, they got a little, you know, very long. You know, the building gets a little high, so, you know, there's a break in the building here, and that's what I'm doing now, is I'm putting the break between the two sets of boards. I'm also gonna just put in a little air vent or air hole, just part of the old barns. Right now it's brown, but I'll probably end up getting a little darker here. I'm going to use a little bit of indigo. We're just going to... Yay, my first window. All right, side of the barn here. What I have is a kind of a door that's open. And, you know, one door is kind of pushed behind the other one. And I'm going to create a little dark area back here. All right, and I will be, you know, do a little bit of the fine line work to help, you know, kind of make it look like a old barn. All right, so this door will hopefully look like it's a little bit behind this door. There. So we're going to let that kind of set up. I'm just going to keep going. Again, I'm still just using the burnt sienna and the... I'm using a little bit of the ultramarine blue and the indigo. So I'm coming over here. I'm going to put a little bit of shadow under that eaves. Is that the word? I'm not sure.
Where the roof overhangs the building.
Yeah, that thing. All right. So, as you can see, I kind of did a little outline too. But what's going to happen is I will take a little bit of the brown again, and I'm just going to work it down the edge like here. That's going to be my shadow. As you can see, I'm going to gently blend that shadow away to nothing, okay? So, dark on one side near the eaves, and then, like I said, I'll just gently blend things away, okay? I'm even going to add a little more color. All right, same here. Nice little bit of shadow under that. All right. And the barn both these barns are now starting to take on a little bit of perspective, you know. All right. Okay, good. Now detail obviously is going to be last, but here I am kind of dividing the building again. I'm going to add maybe a little more line work. See, it's still damp up near the top there. But I have a lot of fun with this kind of wet and dry technique. So it gets kind of blended, soft here and there and hard. And it's just a matter of some of the stuff's wet, some of it's dry. So it kind of gives it an old feeling. All right, so again, I'm just dragging a few of these boards down. Ooh, we're going to do a door. All right. So, let's see, a door. We could just kind of do I usually have like a little cross beam. And as you can see, I'm using a very fine tip on my brush. These brushes, they're Lowell Cornell's. I don't know if that's if it can be seen, but it's the 720 Ultra Round, and they have a round, and they have ultra round. Ultra round is what you want. They hold up pretty good. They're fairly inexpensive, and they hold their tip for a very long time if you take care of your brushes. You don't leave them in the water like this, because that kills the tip. Okay, so when you're done with your brush, don't leave them in the water. Just set them off to the side. Have another jar, possibly, you know. But when I'm teaching, when I have students, I end up usually running around the room going, take that out of the water, take that out of the water. It just, you know, I'm trying to get people to preserve their brushes a little bit longer. All right, I'm gonna come over to this building real quick. I'm gonna do the same thing again. I'm just adding, you know, features. Ooh. Use the side of my brush a little bit there to just drag a little color down. I want some of the lighter and then darker values on this building. I'm going to let that set up for a minute. Okay. Notice how much this faded away here. I'm going to go back in now. That's because I put a little bit of moisture on it. Now I'm going to go back in using my very fine tip and working very dry. I put those lines back in again. Okay, and here and there, I'm just gonna drag the fine line here and there. Okay. A lot of times, watercolors, you have to hit it with 2 coats. Sometimes you just can't do it all in 1 coat, okay? So I'm going to go back in here. I want this area to be very dark, okay? So I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to hit it with another coat of paint. There. So I just want that dark. I'm going to go ahead and put this in. Like I said, you know, for some things, you know, if you're looking for a real good dark, it just means you got to use a lot more paint, a lot less water. And then, like I said, sometimes you just got to do a couple coats. There's just no way around it. Oh, that's kind of cool. All right, back over here. Throw those two little windows in. Okay. We'll let that set up. I'm going to go back now, and I'm going to work on the roof. Roofs. Roofi. All right. This building, obviously, we're seeing a very narrow angle, so you're not going to you know, these lines are going to be fairly close together, okay? And don't go crazy. Don't try to put all 50 lines in. I just put a few in, let it go, okay? This one's a little more spread out. I don't know if you can tell, but it looks like, you know, obviously the building is bent down somewhere back in here, but you can't see it because the front of the building is actually in the way. So we're just gonna kind of fake it a little bit. It's a little tighter in here. And then as I come around here, they're a little more spaced apart, okay? Now, you don't outline, okay? Don't go out here, and I'm certainly not going to do this edge either. So you want to be careful you're not, you know, faux pas number 47 kind of thing. All right, so at this point, now this isn't exactly an outline. This is me trying to get an edge to that roof line there. All right, now I'm gonna just take a little bit of water. I'm gonna bleed it like I've done other things in this painting, just so that what I'm trying to get, and what I will get eventually, is a kind of nice rusty look to the top. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to get a little more darker, there we go, a little darker brown, okay? And I'm going to kind of blend a little of that in too. I'm just looking for kind of nice beat up looking roof. So any texture you add to it just kind of adds to the age. Again, I just kind of like to moisten that a little bit. We'll let that one set up. This guy, this little shed, I'm going to turn this upside down, sorry. But a little easier for this left-hander to be in a dry area. So get some nice little lines in there. I'm going to soften the bottom a little bit. We'll let that set up. Okay. In the meantime, I'm going to let stuff dry. On the buildings, but I can work around. So what I'm going to do is a little bit of the background now. There's some trees in here also. So what I'm going to do...
Take a quick second.
Hey, I'm about to throw a couple trees in the background here. So, first thing I'm going to do is this time I am going to wet the paper behind the tree, behind the buildings. I have one tree between the buildings, another tree behind them. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to wet this up. When you wet the paper, I just want to kind of remind people that you want the water to soak in a little bit. You don't want it to just be a pool on the top and then you start trying to add paint, because the paint won't move in onto the paper properly. But as soon as it soaks in a little bit, that's your optimum time to start adding color. So I am going to, one of the things I forgot to do is prep my paint, but it still looks pretty wet, so I think I'll be okay. I'm using the Schmincke's May Green, and I'm using a little chromium oxide to get what I think is a halfway decent leaf green, tree green. So I'm going to go ahead and drop it in. As you can see, it's moving. See how it's spreading, it's moving apart. Now the idea is, I'm not trying to sit here and do individual branches or leaves or anything like that. That comes later. Right right now, all I'm trying to do is kind of block in some color, leave a little light, leave a little air here and there, because that gives the, that'll be an opportunity to throw a tree limb or two in, that kind of thing. All right, so I brought some of the tree down between the building and in front of the back building here. All right, so that looks pretty good. Now, what happens when paint hits the edge of your of the wet? Okay, what happens is it'll actually bump up and create a line. So what we want to do is kind of maybe softly blend the edges of this so that we don't get one hard edge. It's might be a little hard to see here, but I am attempting to, kind of break it up just a hair so our surface, we don't have any hard edges. And that looks good. Now, the other one over here dried up while I was talking, so doing the other one. So I'm just going to kind of come in here, just going to re-wet this surface. And again, add a little more color to my paint tray. And off we go. So don't forget, everything dries 30% lighter. So that's kind of cool because I'll be able to go in and I'll have various values. So it'll be a little darker here, a little lighter here. Just like a tree, all the shadows and stuff that go into a, light hitting a tree, you have all those branches and all the different values. So this, I'm kind of liking that. It looks pretty good. Oh, I got it. It appears to be some shrubbery in the back here. Now, it's not a big surface back here, so I'm just going to paint it in, okay? I'm not going to wet it, and only because, you get, like I said, you get to a certain point, it's so small, it's like, I'm going to wet it and then paint it. Let's do it. Okay. So, if you're wondering where my hand goes, where I'm wiping my brush off, it's on my pants, okay? Because it's a habit I've done for 30 years and I can't stop now. So, that's, most people have a little paper towel right in front of them. They do this. I have funny colored jeans. So, works, and like I said, it's a habit now. So, if you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm just wiping my brush off. All right, these look pretty good. I'm going to go ahead, while these are setting up, I'm going to paint a little bit of a field in here. I want the color to be sort of like, maybe a little more like a yellow ochre, more golden colors. What sort of like crops that have already been raised up, and like corn, when it starts getting towards September, October, where it'll look like a field that's been kind of chopped down. So I'm going to wet the paper, and you be careful when you get up to edges like buildings and stuff. You take your time. So you're not slopping one paint into another kind of thing. One scene into another. So there's a couple little fence posts that I didn't hit. I could probably go right over them because, but I won't this time. All right, so I got a little color there. I'm going to take this is a little brighter yellow. This is, yeah, what is that? This looks like a cad yellow, okay? I was going to use yellow ochre until I realized I didn't bring any, so it's okay. We'll just we'll create something. I'm going to take a little burnt sienna, add a little to the cad yellow, and it would appear I've gotten looks a little brown right now, but I'll just add a little more yellow. And it's not yellow ochre, but it's kind of a nice color, kind of a nice fall color. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to blend it into my image here. And there's a bit of a valley, and I have some kind of high grass growing in front here. This will all be kind of like tall dried grasses. So as you can see, I don't have a very hard edge here. I have a pretty loose edge. I am going to come in, since it is a bit of a valley, I'm going to darken this up a little bit along the bottom. Okay. So
now, for people wondering, was this originally a photograph that you kind of based your drawing on?
Yes, and I did manipulate it. I changed it. I had a couple buildings. I wanted a little extra one in the back. Added more trees. I added a little. I wanted kind of a rolling hill feel back here. So yeah, that's the beauty of being an artist. You have the ability to change. I believe in the photo there was a telephone pole I didn't like. I removed it. You can, work from photographs, and the nice thing is, you have a good reference material. But the nice thing is, you're the artist. You can manipulate the scene. And I always laugh when my students get a little too into the actual photo, and it's like, you're not painting a photo. You're painting, you're doing watercolors, and what you're trying to do is your interpretation of that scene. So if there's, telephone wires, gone, hey, maybe you want telephone wires. It just depends on, what you're trying to achieve in your painting. But you're the artist. You get to add, delete, change. It's part of the being an artist. Basically, you're not a camera. So I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to have a little bit of that field extend back here. Okay. I'm going to let that set up. Okay. So the next part of this, I'm going to go back probably to the buildings, okay? Only because I can't really, I want to do some background trees, okay? As you can see, the white area back here and back here. But because of the moisture, because this is still wet, I can't really, get in there. So while that's going on, I'm going to come back to my buildings. I'm going to start kind of finishing up little details that that need to be done. So for one, I'm going to add a little color to the front of the soffit here, down the side a little. Okay, just doesn't take a lot of color either. All right, so this one, come under here. And as you can see, I'm using dry brush because I want, I want it to stay sharp. They're boards. Okay. I don't want it blending all over the place. Being careful not to hopefully hit my trees or anything. I should be okay. Alright, so there's that. And I feel that I would like a little more shadow under this soffit here. So I'm going to hit it with a lot of color, okay? And you'll understand in a second. So what I'm doing is more or less kind of putting a lot of paint on. But the reason I'm doing that is so that I can now take the bottom edge of this chunk of paint. I'm just going to kind of bleed it down and away. And I end up with a kind of a nice shadow under the eaves once again. Same here. I'm going to need to make this have a little more character, a little more value to the shadows there. So I'm just going to kind of bleed that down a little bit. I'm thinking I'm going to add, this is the thing about watercolor, you put your color in, you let it dry, and you might add some more work, and then you look and you go, hey, oh, it's no longer a deep enough value. So you might have to go back in and say, I want a little more, pop. I want a little more contrast between my lights and darks. So you might have to go back in and hit it again and hit it again, It just, as you do things, you'll learn, you'll see, oh, I want this to be a little more alive. I want this to pop a little more. So you'll add a little more contrast, maybe a little more value, a little more color. And that's what I'm doing now while I'm waiting. I'm just kind of going in and it's like, hey, I think I want a little more, a few more cracks and a little more brown or red or whatever. All right. Okay. As you can see, I kind of hit my, I hit that and got a little paint up in where the trees are. Not a problem because I'm going to have a much deeper color over top of it, so I'm not even worried. Hey, I got a little tiny shed way back here. I think while I'm waiting, I'm going to paint that in real quick. Now, obviously, as you get farther away, you want less detail. Okay. So, I'm not going to do a lot to this little shed. I'm just going to basically color it. I don't know if you notice the white line I put. Oh, look, it's bleeding in a little bit. The lighter brown into the gray. It's like, cool. It's a watercolor. Let it bleed. Let things bleed into each other. It just makes it look like a watercolor. And that's the beauty of watercolor is it's like one of the only mediums where you let the paint do the job for you. Sometimes you get some very happy mistakes, I call them. But what it is you do acrylic, or if you do oil, wherever you put the paint, that's where it sits. With watercolor, you're dropping color into water, and it can move. And it moves. It does move. So what you want to do is use that. I'll sit and watch my painting as it dries. Talk about sitting around watching the paint dry. You're trying to adjust the color or adjust the values while it dries. You might add more paint or you might lift. It's just it's a hard concept to grasp, but once you do, your watercolors get a lot more fun because you let it do the job for you. You throw the color in and watch it go, okay? And then you sit back and make sure it doesn't screw up. While it dries, you have that opportunity to correct or add. And we'll go into that later with other pieces. This is a lot of little detail stuff, so I don't have a whole lot of opportunity to express that on this occasion, but we will get into it. Right now, again, I'm sitting around watching paint dry. I'm going to very quickly throw in my I forget what you call these things. Fence posts. I lived on a farm. I know the names for almost everything. I just have chosen to forget them over time. Alright, so I'm just putting a little base coat on them. I'm going to let that set up. I think I'm actually dry enough. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my background trees, you know, like a little bit of a forest behind the fields there. I'm going to, now I don't want it to be as bright as my foreground trees. They're in the distance. We want to gray them down. We want them to be a little bit duller and certainly more or less distinct. Excuse me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use the same color, that same light green, the May green and the chromium oxide. The May green, it's called May green in the Sminky paints, but the best, the most similar color, you know, the standard color is called permanent green light. Okay, it's not exactly the same as the Schminky May green, but it's very similar. They have a lot of greens, and most of them, you know, all these paint companies, they have a lot of greens, and I swear they're all ugly. Almost all of them are ugly. But for some reason, you mix permanent green light with almost any other green, and you get a nice green. So this is a big hint for you. You'll love it. So over time, you will discover sap green is too blah. You know, there's just so many greens out there that they're the common colors, but they're very dull a lot of times. So throw a little permanent green into your other greens, and you'll find you get a much better green out of it. All right, at this point, I've now mixed my chromium oxide with the May green or the permanent green, and I now want to dull it down. I want to gray a color. The way you gray a color is you use the opposite color on the color wheel. Red is green, blue is orange, yellow is violet. So wherever it is on the color wheel, the opposite, there you go. So I'm going to add just a little bit of red. This is a cad red, and I added way too much. So we're going to add, go back and grab a little more green. What I forgot to say is, honestly, the graying color, just a little dab will do you. You don't need a lot, okay? So there, I've now mixed a kind of a grayed down green. I'm not going to add any more. All right, now for this background. Oops, I guess I didn't get my, it's okay. I'm just going to kind of wet this background down a little bit. I'm going to go up over my sky a little too, okay? just because I want it to kind of blend up and over into my sky. So there isn't a white line or a kind of a meeting place between the sky and that background. I want it to be a little softer. So let's try it out. Okay. So if we did it right, you really won't see much of a line between the two. Get my little shed back here. A little bit more tree line. And I'm sorry, I'm picking this up. I like to, watercolors is fun. You get to pick up your paper and you can direct, the water into directions, Oh, sorry. All right. So I've got a little more over here behind this shrubbery. All right. Now, you can't do this all in one coat. You have to, or at least, well, maybe you can, but I think it's a little better if you do it in a couple of coats. So we got it started though. Okay. So at this point, this is dry. I could go in and put my washes in. What I had in mind for the foreground was a very tall dried grass. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to put in a little a background value or a color down first. So I'm going to use the CAD yellow. However, at this point, I got a pretty good mess in my tray, so I'm going to stop and clean me out a section. Wait, maybe I don't have to stop. Let's see if I can do this. Yes, I can. Never mind. So just grab a paper towel, clear out a section. And you know what? I do need fresh water. Don't let your water get too dirty, okay? So, if you want, we can keep going if you will. Yeah. I will now sing. I've been looking forward to waiting till he left the room. But we're doing pretty good. We're getting close. Thank you. A lot of my students, a lot of people, watercolorists I know, they usually have two waters. One to clean the brush and one to use fresh water to actually use in your paint. So I'm being a little bit lazy, but I think we'll be fine. All right, so I'm going to pull out some of the CAD yellow. Like I said, I like to get it on the tray so I can see it, okay? All right. I'm also going to add to this CAD yellow, I'm going to add another yellow, Naples yellow. Now, Naples yellow is a very opaque yellow, okay? It has, I think, a lot of Chinese white in it. So, but I kind of like that it tones down the brightness of the CAD yellow. I don't want, I don't want my grass to glow in the dark, basically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet this. I can use a bigger brush too. And let's make sure it's clean. No, it's blue. Okay. Can I? All right, don't look. All right. So I'm going to try, yep, it's clean. So I'm going to start, I'm going to wet this. And I think, you know, after we do this, we'll have to take a break. Which, if Mark does this right, you'll barely notice. All right, so I've got it fairly wet. I'm gonna leave a little white at the bottom. Sometimes I like to kind of leave it unfinished towards the bottom. This looks pretty good though. All right, so grab my paint. You notice that the yellow from the background's a little bit different. I want that because I want to see a little bit of a contrast between the two fields. This one's going to be kind of like the background's going to be more of a like rows of cut down stalks of corn. This is going to be more freewheeling, just old grasses that have grown up. I'm not going to say these buildings are abandoned, but they got that look. Okay. And don't forget your the colors will. Now notice while it's wet, while it's wet, you'll notice that I am trying to get a little variation in the color. Okay, this is just makes it more interesting, I think. You know, like the wind's blowing the grass a little bit. We ain't got, there's not going to be much, any kind of detail here yet, okay? I will get to that. But for right now, if you'll notice at the down by the bottom where it's drier, I'm just kind of throwing a little, just a little texture, a little, you know, give it a little character so it isn't quite so straight across or anything. I think at this point we pretty much do have to take a break now because I will get my hands in this. All right. So a little here and ta-da. Ta-da. Break. Everything's dry. We've got the foreground color in, and like I said, I'm going to make this deep grass here, but first I'm going to put a little bit of detail into the rolling hill in the background. So what I'm going to do is just kind of make rows. All right, so I'm going to add a little bit of the Naples yellow, and I'm going to do a little bit of the burnt sienna, just so I get kind of a warm, maybe even a little orange. Just kind of get a warmer color, a warmer, flatter kind of yellow. All right, and I want to kind of give it the feeling that, like I said, that these are fields that were probably already cut down, kind of thing. So basically, they're just kind of stripes that are kind of rolling over the hill. So not rolling enough. There we go.
Now this is a dry brush technique right now.
Exactly. This is I haven't wet it yet. I am gonna put a little water on it to just kind of moisten it up a little bit, loosen up the line work. But as you can see, yeah, I'm working on a dry surface. And that's why it's not moving at all. That's think as we get farther back, I might make my lines a little bit thinner. Okay, now again, I'm going to take, while it's still damp, I'm going to take a little bit of water. I'm just going to kind of go over this just to kind of soften up so it isn't quite so contrast between light and dark. It's more of a little warmer, softer contrast. And I maybe right about there. So it gives it a little texture now. I've got some rolling hills with a little, like I said, kind of cut down corn, cut down wheat, something. Somebody's gone through there and taken the crop. A little more back here, okay? So now, I'm going to do a little foreground work now. This is all dry brush, pretty much. It's something I like doing. I like making tall grasses. And again, I'm going to probably use the Naples, a little bit of orange again. I might even grab a little of the cad yellow just to kind of get a little more gold to it. All right. So, with a good brush and a good point, as you can see, fairly fine tip. Definitely not a wash brush, okay? So this is what I'm going to do is I am going to start creating grass. As you can see, when I do this, a lot of people tend to do, this is fun, a lot of people, when they start doing patterns, they tend to do, can you see this? Mm-hmm. See how they'll do the same pattern over and over again. So it'll all be the same thing, and it's just, that's not nature, okay? So what I do is I try to change the angle a little bit as I'm painting. So if you'll notice, and I don't go crazy, okay? And I don't do a lot of stuff. I'm doing grass that's kind of blowing in the wind kind of thing, okay? So it's going to tend to go in that direction. So it might be from a 90 to, 90, up to 180, but not really. There's usually nothing just straight up and down. So what I'm going to do now is just going to kind of soften that up again. I take the water and I blend it down because I don't want too much, I don't want it too sharp too quickly. Okay, eventually I will end up with sharper bits, but what I'm doing right now is just kind of creating a movement. And again, as you can see, I'm trying very hard not to be, not to create too much of a pattern. The only pattern I want to see is it's more or less blowing that way. So now the stuff up front is going to be longer because you can see more of it. All right, so I've got this going. And then as I work backwards, you're not going to see the whole strip of a piece of grass. You're going to just kind of see the tops way in the back if it's all tall grass, okay? So when you get back here, grass is going to be more of a much shorter. So, but I'm still kind of, the other thing is it doesn't have to be lined exactly too. It can be like just strips of color. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put some strips of color in. And that'll kind of represent bands of grass. So you see a little bit of the light between. And I like how it's kind of rolling down the hill a little bit. Some more strips of color. So I'm getting the feel of grass without having to sit there and do every little hair, every little blade. And as you can see, as I move forward, I try to make the bands a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier. Because you're seeing a little bit more of the grass, each blade of grass then. All right, I'm going to add a little more color here. A little of this. All right. Now, the other part of this is, if you look at grass, when, especially tall, it's like there's bands of color. It's because some of the stuff's laying down a little more, and since it is, it's going to create, the grass around it's going to be creating shadow on the stuff that's laying down a little bit more, and that's what I'm trying to represent here. I think you can see the light and the dark, well, not necessarily dark, but light and darker values in the grass that I'm doing. Now, as I come closer, and I like kind of around this fence line here, I want to be able to see the grass a little bit better. So, using kind of a negative space approach here, if you'll notice, it's lighter in front and a little darker in the back, and I can make that light grass pop up. Is that showing up?
Yes.
Good. All right. So negative painting is basically you're kind of painting behind the subject, which is the grass in this instant. You're painting behind the grass a little darker value to make the foreground lighter color pop up. And that's what I'm doing now, okay? I'm going to come back. I'm going to do a little more. Now this is still wet, so I can't quite do it here right now. All right, so while that's drying, I'm just going to kind of come in and I'm going to blast a little more color in here over these finer lines. And just kind of soften that up a little bit, break it up a little. What we're trying to do is, it's not all one value, because tall grass just isn't. If you go out and look at hay or whatever, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's kind of great to work from photos, but I'll tell you what, nothing beats getting out there and actually looking at what you're doing. Take pictures, but observe. Photography lies a little bit, okay? Sorry, Mark. Basically, your ability to see color or value, actually, is a bigger range than a camera. For example, if from 1 to 8, 1 being light and 8 being the darkest, a camera can see 1 to 8. A human can see 1 to 13. So there's that much more value that you can see. So that's a lot of times you'll look at a photograph and the shadow under the trees is black or very dark, But if you actually just kind of looked outside under the trees, you would go, yeah, it's nothing near that. It's because we see a little more value than a camera does. So, my point being, I've lost it. We'll go back to that. But the idea is get out there and look. Work from real life if you can. I think it's awesome. But just remember, it's not all, it's not all photographs. That's why it's kind of nice to photograph. That way you have the subject matter, but also do a quick sketch, do a quick watercolor sketch. Get your paints out, get your cheap paper out instead of using the really good stuff, and just go and do a quick rendering so that, you know, you have some of the colors and that kind of thing. So we'll talk about that. We'll probably do some outdoor visualization one of these days, soon actually. All right, so as you can see, I don't have to put individual lines. If you'll notice, I'm kind of using the negative space to bring out the grass, the deeper grass. And I just keep building. As it dries, I can add more color. I'll add more line work and value. In this perfect world here that I'm in right now, my grass is perfect. Look, it's all the same color and it's beauty. That's just usually not the case, you know. So what I want to do is probably add some other color, you know, change it up a little bit so that maybe a little green, a little something else, so that, you know, because nothing is ever perfect, you know, the color, anything. So I like having a little bit of, you know, random nature shine in there. So I'm throwing a little green in. I don't want to do the whole picture like that, but I do want to have some of it. You can't just have one little spot of color. There, I did my green and I'm done. You got to kind of go in and play with it a little bit. You got to kind of bring that green throughout the image. Don't forget, as you get farther back though, as you can see, my line work gets lighter, or not lighter, but shorter. Okay, so you can kind of see it as I'm working. I'm just going to put a little strip of green in there. Just get a little more color in there. All right.
We're going to have to take a break in a second.
Okay. All right, so I think at this point, let's take a break. Let this dry up, and then I'm going to start doing hard detail. So let's let this dry. And now we're going to more or less finish up with detail. And I'm going to start on the trees, and I'll probably work on the buildings, fence posts, then a little bit of the background, and then the foreground. So for the trees, I'm going to add a little more value to certain areas. We want trees that are three-dimensional. So we're going to have, I'm going to work dry and then probably, you know, excuse me, moisten it up a little bit. So I am a little darker values than what I was using originally. Pretty much the same colors though. All right. So down by the little lower in the tree where the sun maybe isn't quite hitting, but you know, trees are round, so you know, sun hits everywhere on them. But I'm getting there. All right. So let's see what else I got here. And a little of the green, lighter green. All right. So as you can see, now I'm going for deeper values. With watercolors, with anything, with a good drawing or painting, your values have to be from very light to very dark. You can't have it all in the middle. You can't have it too light. So to get a good composition, to get a good painting, you really do have to have, you know, a good value throughout the painting. So as you can see, I'm now starting to put a much deeper value into my trees. And if you look at trees in the summer when they're, you know, or late summer, you know, they can get pretty thick and dark on the inside. So as you can see, I've kind of brought out a few of the branches to be lighter. When I say branches, it's like whole chunks of leaves. It's not individual little, you know, sticks and twigs. Although, now that I mentioned sticks and twigs, we're gonna add some. There's trees are not perfect, especially if they're all out in a old dead field. So there's always a little bit of, I don't know if you guys, this is going to be maybe a little hard to see. I'm hoping we can pull the camera in tight enough, but I'm just pulling out some dead branches because nothing says natural like dead stuff, okay? So that's what I'm doing. I'm pulling out a few dead sticks and twigs here and there. And then I will probably pull in some heavier branches that poke out. But for right now, I'm just putting in a few sticks, little twiggy things. And the nice thing about this is I'll do this, and then I'll probably go back, take a little bit of green, maybe on a few of these twigs, add maybe just a little bit of something. That's a little bit heavy in value. I didn't want them quite that dark, so I'm just gonna lift a little bit of the paint back out. There. This kind of gives our tree the opportunity to have a little air kind of shining through around the edges. So it doesn't take a lot. It really doesn't. And this kind of stuff, a little can go a long way. So you do want to kind of, there. You want to kind of take care you don't overdo little gimmicks here and there. That's something else that beginners tend to do. And I'm just going to, you know, warn you, don't do it. So, I had one nice lady, I swear to God, I'd show her technique, she'd beat it to death. So, like I said, everything with a little grain of salt, you know, just don't overdo it. Use the techniques, but don't abuse them. All right, so that one looks pretty good. All right, got one more over here. So I'm going to hit it with a little bit of value, get some dark parts. Okay. Let's see how what I do is I'll put a chunk of paint down, and then I just, using what paint I put down, I just use it as kind of a reservoir and start pulling paint out of that and bring it up and around. Okay, so I'm lifting a little of the color out. I thought it got a little strong. Now I'm going to come down here, maybe get a little more color back in here. The little branches and stuff, I tend to just, you know, kind of dibby-dab. Little individual blops. I mean, we're obviously not doing leaves, we're doing clumps of leaves. But then I think, again, what I'll do is I'll probably take and maybe just soften a little bit of it. And again, I'm going to grab a little of the indigo, maybe a little bit of the brown too. Don't use just brown when you're doing branches and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of people do that, and if you look, most branches and trees are more in the gray values. Okay? Okay. So you can kind of come out. Again, I might grab a little bit of green and just that. All right. I'm going to let that set up. This will dry fairly quickly. In the meantime, I'm kind of looking at my fields. How can I separate this from the kind of plowed field in the back there? Not plowed, but cut down field in the back. I think a little bit of the opposite. I'm going to gray down and create a little shadow to separate the foreground from the background here. So, once again, when you're graying down a color, you use its opposite in the color wheel, which for yellow or golden, I'm going to use a violet. So, what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to mix them together. I'm going to create what's called a glaze, a layer of color over top of the yellow. So what I'm doing is I'm going in and I'm creating a band of purple there, very light, violet rather. To me, violet's more of a reddish purple rather than a bluish purple. And as you can see, it created a nice shadow. I didn't make it more gold because that just gets, you know, old. And I've already got tons of gold. So by adding just a little bit of violet to the edge here and rolling it up, bleeding up and rolling it out, I get a nice, nice color. It's a pleasant shadow. It's not gray. It's a little, you know, a little brighter, a little perkier color. And, oh yeah, a little bit back here. Same thing. Just gonna bring it up and around. Okay. Now, this is driving me crazy a little bit. So I've decided I'm going to work on the fence posts. If you'll notice, I just kind of brushed them down with a dry brush. I left some of the white along the edges, you know, within these little fence posts. That just kind of gives it that kind of grayish lichens, you know, stuff kind of growing on them. There's a little bit of light to them too. So what I did, I put some fine lines in there to represent the wood, you know, splitting and cracking. Obviously very old fence posts. And I'm gonna get a little value, put a little value. I just realized something now. No laughing, but I have the shadow in the buildings on this side, and I have the light coming on this side. So I did make a mistake, and I do that on occasion. So we're just going to switch the side to the shadow side, so that you guys will not be writing me or laughing at me. So sorry about that. There we go. Know your light source. And now I'm just gonna throw in a little bit of the brown. You can barely see it. It's just me mixing a little bit. It's just changing the color of the gray a little bit. All right, so go to the next. Let's get some of that gray back in there again. And as they get farther away, I'm going to turn this over. They're going to get, obviously, smaller and less detailed. There's just, you know, at a certain point, there's only so much you can do. All right. This one has a board between it. And these two little guys, I'm just gonna... Again, their value's a little heavy, so I just pull a little bit out. He's good. All right, I might even make them a little bigger, just so I did forget that that violet is still a little damp back there. That should be okay. And then maybe one more behind the hill. Ta-da. All right. I'm now going to do a little bit of work on the background. I think it's a little pale. So let me grab a little violet, or a little bit of the red again. Okay. And I'm going to kind of go back in here. I'm going to hit it heavy on the bottom side, kind of where the shadows would be in a forest line anyway. And just kind of let it bleed up. And you can break it up a little bit with maybe different trees, or, you know, I'm just blopping color in. I'm just dropping in drops of color, and since it's wet, it's just kind of dispersing, and I'm getting, you know, the feeling of little trees, you know, trees farther back in the background. So I'm going to do it again on this side. So I'm going to take my darker color, just run it along the edge. Again, I'm applying it dry. I'm also mixing up another batch real quick. There we go. I'm applying it a little dry. And I'm about to just let it, see how I grab just the edge of that with a wet brush and pull. Just run around the edge there and watch the paint just flow up into the wet surface. And now I'm just kind of coming along and I'm going to create little happy trees and squirrels. You won't be able to see them, but we're going to do a tree. I'm just trying to break up so it isn't all just one value once again. And I'll go around the little building. And again, I'm just going to bleed it up a little bit by just letting the water touch that paint, and it just will go where the water is. So at this point, I'm getting, you know, close. Okay. Break. I have to break? Okay. I'm down to the final steps now. What I usually do is get all the big stuff in, you know, some of the detail. Now I'm getting down to the little stuff. Fine lines. I think it's important that you practice creating, you know, good strokes, learning how to make a fine line. It's not absolutely, you know, necessary, but you can get a lot more detail depending, you know, on your steadiness of hand. I'm going to show you something very quickly if you see my hand, a lot of people sit here and try to do a fine line with their hand off the paper. My recommendation is you get your hand anchored. Use your arm, use your whole, but once you kind of anchor your hand, then you can bring the brush down to the paper. Okay, and you can get some fine lines. You just got to make sure that you're not in wet paint or anything, so you're not smearing your painting around. But what I'm going to do now is basically slow down a little bit and create some finer lines in the building, on the roofs. Is that a word? And just kind of finish up real quickly, I hope. So, all right. The other thing is, I don't want too much paint. So I'm throwing in some very fine lines so I can get some boards along the edge of the building here. The narrow edge of the building. I might add just a little more shadow here. Yeah. And then, again, maybe drag down just some of that color from the shadow I just made. Just kind of pull that down. Use it as a well, to pull your color from. I'm just sharpening up a little bit some of these lines. I might come in here and mess with the door a little bit, give it a little depth. Okay. And then also, I think I'm going to stick a little bit of hardware on the door. So, just a couple little metal doohickeys. All right, the other thing that's, I think, kind of bothering my eye, or I feel isn't finished, is this building here. I feel it did not get enough proper finishing. So, adding a little more line work. So I would get a piece of paper and just practice doing lines. Just learning how to hold it steady, and just, like I said, most of the time I'm not using my fingers like this. I'm usually I'm dragging my whole hand. I think we'll have a little lesson on that in the future. So back here, again, this is almost too light, so I put a little bit of shadow line in there too. So again, I'm kind of coming up, creating a little bit of a shadow from the eaves, whatever. We'll look that up too. All right, so again, I'm just kind of lightly softening this. And I think the thing that this building is also missing is, I think there isn't enough burnt sienna. Is that one of my problems, correcting my English as I go?
No.
No? It is now. Now that you mention it. Alright, So, like I said, I'm just adding a little of the brown to kind of give it a little character. My posts are kind of disappearing, though. I almost wish I'd have left them lighter, and next time I will. Again, I'm coming over here now, adding a little more color. And now I'm going to go over here and add a little more value under this too. I'm just going to pull again. Now these smaller lines, yeah, I use my fingers. But on longer stuff, I like to use my whole arm. And I keep doing this. I don't know what it is, but I would like, I don't know, I just would like this to be a little bit darker. And under the roof too. I'm using the dark color to kind of bend the galvanized steel a little bit. Give it some flaws. That might even, I'm going to try, I'm going to put in maybe a little bit of red or orange. Let's try orange. Yeah. Kind of running out of area to work in. Yeah. Try to brighten my rust up a little bit. Again, I'm going to go to the front of the building. Dry? Close enough. Close enough. And I'm just going to pull down a few finer lines. I mean, they don't even have to be continuous. Sometimes it's just kind of neat to get that broken up look. Alright, let's set them down for a sec. See, they don't have to be perfect. That's what's cool. The less perfect they are, the the more rustic your building becomes. Okay. Again, at this point now I'm going to take a little bit of the ultramarine blue, a little bit. Just I want to kind of get a little bit of a wash over the last of the white. Not a lot, because like I said, rainfall usually makes the bottoms a little bit lighter. Okay. And maybe a little more blue up here. So a lot of times, you know, you don't know you're done until you get all the color in. Get everything painted up. Then it kind of helps you see, do I have enough value? Am I done? I think for this class, I think this is close enough. I could probably go in. No, you know what? One more thing. I'm going to take a little bit of the violet. Oh, I'm sorry, that was not violet. This is violet. I'm going to mix it with a little bit of the yellow. I'm going to add just a little bit, a few darker values in here, in the grass, just to kind of break it up a little bit more. The fun thing about watercolors is take the time to get away from it when you're painting. Obviously I can't, but as you're painting, pick it up, walk it out 5 feet away. Watercolor should be seen from about 5 foot away. So, you know, give yourself, people say, I don't like it, I don't like it. And then they get it back where it should be seen, the distance that you should view a watercolor. And a lot of times, you know, everything flows together nicely. So, you know, don't be afraid to take a break, get up and look at it. In fact, I highly recommend that. I'm going to throw a couple dark little patches in here just to kind of break up all this pretty value. We'll get some ugly in here. And like I said, this is about done. Another thing I do is I'll set it aside. I'll put it up on the, you know, I'll put it up and look at it for, I'll look at it for a week. And I'll say, am I done? For today, I think we are. But let me just say that letting it sit for a week isn't a bad idea. Gives you a chance to kind of reflect on it, and a lot of times I'll go back and say, hey man, I want to put a little more color here, or I want to do a little, I might want to put a little barbed wire in here. I'm not going to do it today, but it's something I want to think about. It could be a distraction, so I'm going to think about it. So, but for now, let's call this done, and thank you for working with me. And let's stop at this point. Well, as you can see, I removed the blue tape and signed it, and I'm pretty much finished for today. Like I said, I'll probably work on it a little bit more, but I like to look at it for, like I said, a week or so, give myself an opportunity to, you know, find the good and the bad in everything I do, actually, all the paintings I do. So, thank you very much.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.
Be sure to subscribe.
Be sure to subscribe.
Give this video a like.
Give this video a like.
Look forward to lots more content.
I'm looking forward to Mark being on this side of the camera too, okay? Anyway, thank you very much. See you next time. All right, take care.